Wow. Just finished listening to Confessions 2 by Madonna, and it's incredible. And I was already excited to listen to the tracks, featured in the short film, but the latter half of the album, I was completely unprepared for. Obviously, it's called Confessions 2, as it's meant to be a sort of sequel to, Confessions on the Dance Floor Part 1, but the latter half of this album, I think, is a sequel to Ray of Light. And I've not been expecting that at all. I mean, it's not just in production where some of the tracks become, a bit trip hoppy and experimental as opposed to dance floor fillers, but the lyrics, the introspection, the reflection, the poetry of it. Um, so I was already, sort of hoping slash expecting it to be a good album because I think Confessions on a Dance Floor is you know an amazing album and easily one of Madonna's best. In the past I've said Ray of Light and Confessions are her best albums. So like I say, I had high hopes for this, but I just didn't expect any kind of Ray of Light esqueness to this album. And it's funny, before I pressed play, I've heard clips from the film, and I expected Danceteria to be like my favorite track or something, and that is a brilliant track. But the latter half of this album, I sort of can't get my head around, and again in a great way. Fragile, and those swelling synth strings and the emotion in it, really, took me by surprise. Everything. That track, I'd forgotten there was a track called Everything on this album, just because the title doesn't necessarily stand in your head when you're just reading a track list of 15, tracks. And yet it became one of my instant favorites. It was a mesh of Confessions and Ray of Light all in one. More on the latter half of the album, with Betrayal, with My Sins Are My Saviour. That's got a touch of Justify My Love, touch of erotica. Again with that 90s, experimental, almost R&B-ish, or R&B-ish, almost, trip hoppy. Then The Test, with Lola. Bjork-esque in some ways, experimental. And the closing track, LES Girl, Lower East Side Girl, I expected to be some closing banger, and it's more of an American Life slash music style, picked acoustic song. But again, just amazing. There's tracks on here that remind me of Isaac on Confessions as well, where they mix that acoustic guitar with dance music. But yeah, it's a real artist's album. And I know you might say that's stupid, it's Madonna, she's an artist, but I just mean it's bold, it's brave, it has something to say, both lyrically and sonically. I almost think it's wrong for it to be called Confessions 2, because it implies that it's a follow-on from Confessions 1, and that it's somehow, I don't know, it somehow couldn't stand alone from that. Well, it absolutely could. I mean, the album could be called, I don't know, Danceteria, for example, and just have no connection to Confessions 1. Obviously, it would do because of Stuart Price and him, producing all the tracks. But I just mean the sonic landscape has moved on. It's not just kitsch pastiche of Confessions 1. It's not. It's completely contemporary. But also, it doesn't feel like she's trying to do a sequel to Confessions 1. It feels like she's an artist, experimenting with sounds and music in today's musical landscape, and talking about her life and her opinions and things that have happened to her. It's an album that sounds like Madonna. Again, you might say it's obvious it is Madonna, but there's some tracks in the recent past that almost could be anybody that she's released, and I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, she's great, but this is Madonna being an artist with something to say. And this review, I've only listened to the whole album once all the way through, and I know it's going to be an album that I listen to over and over again. But because of the light and shade in it, because of the say especially the latter half of the album, where it gets more experimental, more introspective and reflective. It's going to be an album that keeps giving, because the first half is, all of it's poppy, all of it's danceable, but the first half is slightly more poppy and danceable, and less introspective. And then, on reflection, the third track, One Step Away, is already a bit Ray of Light-esque. So that gives you the hint. But yeah, I just wasn't expecting it. Sometimes I describe an album as either being a square or a cube, and they can be flat and have dimensions in, the upper and lower and east to west. And, but some albums lack depth and space. But this is one of those albums that I would say is a cube, not a square, where there is dimensions to it, of lyrical depth, of sonic depth, also shallow funness as well. Yeah, I've only listened to it once, and I'm obviously rambling on because I'm stunned by it. But I'm going to keep listening. I'll probably do another review, and I've listened to it a few times. But Confessions 2 by Madonna completely can stand on its own two legs and doesn't need to be called Confessions 2. It could be called its own album, its own right. And I think it's up there with Ray of Light and Confessions 1. And check it out. Brilliant. Push recommends.